Hello, Trash Future listeners. Just a heads up, there are a few live events coming up that we wanted to mention. Trash Future will be performing at the Big Fat Festival at Big Belly Comedy Club in London on Saturday, June 21st. There's a link in the show notes. Also, as a side note, Lions Led by Donkeys will be performing at that same festival on Sunday, June 22nd. Similarly, if you would like to encounter Milo, you need to be in Australia for that. However, his Melbourne Comedy Festival show is ongoing, and that is available at the link in the show notes as well. Look for the Milo Alert. And if you simply want to see me, Lions Led by Donkeys has an upcoming show in London. That's on April 11th, a Friday, at Rich Mix in Shoreditch, and there's a link to buy tickets in the show notes as well. Thank you so much for being a TF listener, and please enjoy this episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this, it's Monday, free episode of TF.
It's a slightly short-staffed one because we've been doing some political purges. So I hope you're gratified to know that me, November, and Riley have seized the podcasting microphones, and all of our co-hosts are in undisclosed locations presently.
Yeah, Milo is being held in Australia.
by the dark woke movement for the crime of many accents.
Yeah. Milo's been detained by Dark Woke. Hussein is being allowed to live out his days in exile. And Nate is being allowed to live out his days in exile. And Hussein has gone to ground, although we are currently actively seeking him.
Have you seen this man?
Yeah. Welcome to TF. It is Nova and Riley today, and we are rejoined by Josef Burton. Joseph, how's it going?
Good. Thanks for inviting me on state TV to read this short statement to ensure you that civil servants and the people do stand behind the new regime, because we do, and I'm a real activist.
Yeah, look, I think if there's one thing that Joseph wants to tell you, it's that you should remain calm.
Stay in your homes, especially late at night.
Yeah, Patriots, however, very much in control.
Yeah, very, very in control. We all agree with this. The people stand behind you. Anyone who doesn't, maybe not part of the people.
Interesting. Yeah. Curious.
That's right. So as a podcast, if you see Kezvanite activity, report it.
If you see things like cereal as a soup, coffee as a soup, if you see kind of like activities such as secretly converting people to Islam or charging white people more for things, just be on the lookout, you know?
Yeah, we're removing all Neon Genesis Evangelion media from every library.
It is considered counter-junta.
I mean, to be clear, the reason why we're doing this, right, is because as you know, right, we tend to be we follow the trade winds of where politics is going, and where politics is going right now is it's purges. We're doing a lot of purges, and so I thought, you know, it would be good for us to get in on the ground floor of that while it's popular, while it's fashionable.
Look, Elon Musk was busy, so instead we hired the recently pardoned CEO of the electric truck company Nikola to come be our Department of Podcast Efficiency, or DOPE. You know what? We are a leaner and meaner machine. We are going to be replacing our microphones with little tin cans and strings so we can save even more money.
Yeah, but I think losing 3/5 of the hosts is just, you know, that's cussing kind of like wasteful, you know, waste energy from the podcast.
Yeah, that's right. We brought in an outside contractor. But this thing I mentioned, by the way, the recently pardoned CEO of the firm Nikola, that old friend of the podcast, former guest, current efficiency consultant, Trevor Milton. We did several episodes about this a couple of years ago while the company was imploding. It was
was Nikola the one? Was that the one with the truck, the electric truck that they had to roll downhill to get it to move?
The fake truck, right?
Yes, that's right.
The fake truck. Was this also the fake truck that was going to like bring a dying Bruce Springsteen song Town back to life, or was that another one of these fake?
No, that was a different fake electric vehicle company.
I mean, if you look at the fake electric truck being rolled downhill, that's a very efficient use of resources. It's way more efficient to just lie in situations like this.
Yeah. So what happened is Trevor Milton, who, by the way, was the topic of a Hindenburg short report. So I am very excited for Serhat Gumruku, the Turkish magician who was behind that like flim-flam cancer care company. I'm excited for him to be made like head of the CDC. I'm excited for Adam Newman to be put in charge of housing and urban development. I think that's going to be great.
Oh, God.
So Trevor Milton, he released a statement through his company Milton Media a couple days ago at time of recording saying, I have been unconditionally pardoned by, God Emperor Trump. And he's like, it's no wonder why trust and confidence in the Justice Department has eroded to nothing. I wish judges would stop just believing whatever prosecutors say so Americans could trust the justice system again.
Getting very close to my joke about, oh my God, Your Honor, who fucking cares?
Yeah. It's just like, it's Trevor was like, look, why are you listening to the prosecutor? He's like obsessed with me. He won't shut up about me. Like, we could just be friends and like we could ditch the LOSER prosecutor over here. So he made this statement that's basically like, you need to stop listening to all prosecutors in financial fraud cases. And what we're seeing with the pattern of like Trump pardons and stuff is that's sort of the plan.
Well, they've had it too good for too long.
Yeah. And the other thing, though, is that there are two other things I think that really help Trevor Milton's case. And when I reviewed the facts, I want to retract our episodes talking about how Nikola was a company that seemed to exist for the purposes of parting investors with their money using, shots of trucks rolling downhill via gravity, is that there are two facts have emerged that I think are pertinent. So I want to apologize to Nikola and Trevor Milton. Number one, at the time, we did not know that his lawyer was the brother of the person who is now U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi. So we didn't know that. Yeah, mea culpa. We didn't know that would be happening. We also didn't know that his wife paid $1.8 million to one of Trump's political action committees. So we didn't know that either. I think those two facts, if we'd known, we was okay, well, clearly this guy's innocent.
Yeah, of course. Because what he did was he made his first ever political donation in life to Donald Trump to the tune of like $10 million, which is, I think we've been analyzing this in the lab, and we can say criminologically that is the act of an innocent man. It's a way you can kind of like, pathologize this is innocent people tend to donate massive amounts to Donald Trump's campaign.
Yeah, 100%. Because it's like an innocent person wants a stronger state with better funded like politics, right? It's like a guilty person would be trying to take money away so that then they couldn't go after them. It just makes sense. So Trump, for his part, talking about this, said, the pardon was highly recommended by many people. I don't know Milton, but they say the thing Milton did wrong was he was one of the first people that supported a gentleman named Donald Trump for president. That's why he got arrested, apparently.
Your Honor, my only crime.
But between this and like the shaking down law firms, it's the naked corruption is more than I expected from Donald Trump, which is foolish of me. I thought there would be a fig leaf, and there isn't, in fact, a fig leaf. It's just a big marble penis or small marble penis, as the case may be, depending on the art style, just hanging out there.
Yeah, they're just they pop the penis right there, and you're there to look. The penis of graft, and you're there looking at it. He supported Trump. He liked Trump. I didn't know him, but he liked Trump. And I guess that's enough. I mean, look, this is going to be a bit of a theme this episode, especially as we get into sort of some of the what the U.S. is doing to its own higher education sector as more evidence for my U.S. is becoming the UK file.
Yeah, just arresting a bunch of students and making us feel bad.
Yeah.
A classic UK move.
Even though the U.S. is outpacing the UK and going in the same directions in some ways, but I would say the conflict between capital and different forms, different slices of capital playing out in them vying for control of the state and, more sort of nakedly reactionary provincial capital, like extractive, resource-based, heavy industry type capital, sort of winning. That is happening in both places, right? The fuck business attitude is also one of, fraud's legal, which is just like, I'm now declaring the American economy to be more fraudulent, more nakedly fraudulent than it was. All of the things in 2008 that were used to cover up huge amounts of like gambling and fraud in the financial sector, they're like, no, that's not personally profitable to us enough. We have to take off another layer of those ideological stories that we tell to make this a more palatable environment for business. It is the ultimate contradiction heightener.
It's ultimately gentry pilled because it's not even like a class-based seizure of power. It's like an individual seizure of power. It's not an idea of like, how do we collectively as like car dealership owners benefit from this? It's like, where's my bag, right? This seems to be like with these pardons in exchange for like direct donations. It's like, how do I personally cash out? Like, where's my dukedom in all of this? It's wild.
Yeah.
It's really cool how Trump is doing the fall of the Soviet Union on the US in like 2 months. And now everybody's like, okay, well, we're going to find out who the new oligarchs are going to be and who the new kind of like Hesse rulers are going to be. And people are just going to like seize towns off the back of their kind of car dealership. So yeah, great. Fantastic.
Yeah. And the Silovics are having group chat drama. But I wanted to do a little bit of news before we get into talking about the immigration dragnets in the States. Another item that's crossed my desk today, before we get into it, is a new Labour Party plan to begin the fight back to no longer have the lowest approval rating in history for a government at this point in its life.
Keir Starmer is going to finally explore ways to become popular. He's been thinking about it really hard, and what's he come up with?
Keir Starmer has come up with, what if we had center-left people on YouTube shows?
Oh my God. Prime Minister Starmer, sir, I place myself at the disposal of this, cultural revolution. I'm willing to become the centrist Joe Rogan.
Again, this is like, once you start seeing the US and UK crumbling in parallel ways, you just can't stop seeing the similarities. This is the same conversation that the Democrats were having in like late November, which is the problem is the podcasts. The problem is the YouTubes. We have to have our own podcasts and YouTube.
Well, listen, we already kind of exiled and arrested like, a majority of our own podcast just now. I think we're ready to pivot centristwards.
Yeah, this is now the best time ever to just to walk up to the Labour Party and be like,
give him a big wet kiss on the lips.
Yeah, that's right. No, a big hug. So this is the Labour Growth Group of 110 MPs. Yeah, the group of Labour backbenchers that's saying, Keir Starmer, why will you not go for growth?
And it's definitely not a benign growth, I'll tell you that.
Yeah. By doing abundance. They say they're working with leading podcasters and popular figures to help Labour's backbenches become influencers in their own right, amid concerns that toxic narratives about the party's agenda, its politicians, and policies are going unchallenged. Number one, those conspiracy theories or whatever, we talked about those when we spoke about the posting to minister pipeline last episode, which is, that's just because like Telegraph journalists or like GB News people are all following esoteric fascists on Twitter. Yeah. And so like, that's not new media. That's just old media.
It's just really funny to be doing your like why we lost this election to reform briefing in advance while you're still in power. It was the podcasts what lost it, right? Because this isn't campaigning, this isn't strategizing, this is excuse making in advance. I think that's the only way to understand it.
Yeah, 100%.
And this is the only thing that like whether it's Democrats or the Labour Party, that they kind of really know what to do with power besides enrich themselves and immiserate a few other people incidentally, is to be like, well, actually I'm doing great. My opponent is hacking. And when I get kind of thrown out of power, it will be because you didn't like me enough. It is your fault for not wanting to hang out with me.
Yeah. And the closest responsibility they will admit in that process is saying, look, maybe the problem is that like we aren't having Torsten Bell doing like vigilante pedophile hunting videos.
It's just like guy who has climbed into your house through the window in the middle of the night and has been living in your kitchen for like 2 weeks being like, maybe the problem is, okay, I'm willing to meet you halfway on this. Maybe you're too stupid to know why you should like me.
Yeah. You're too brainwashed by your dumb entertainment. With you're watching too much either Mr. Beast or Vitaly the pedophile hunter. So we need to make
a horrible crossover.
Oh God,
Mr. Beast blowing up a school bus full of pedophiles.
Yeah. So I say those involved are working with a popular British YouTuber with more than 1 million followers who's already provided a trial media clinic. The MPs were told they could only challenge internet creators by neglecting the Whitehall obsession with traditional establishment media.
I really like the idea of a media clinic for the Labour Party because it really feels like it's not the setting in which you would typically give out a terminal diagnosis. And
yeah,
assisted dying at the media clinic.
Yeah.
So a labor figure with knowledge of the plan said, quote, "We've got to face up to the fact that today's media landscape is not the same as 1997. And it's like, yeah, it didn't have to be if you'd passed press regulation in the late 2000s.
Well, also, that was always a phantasm as well, because like as much as Cool Britannia might have been a thing, enthusiasm for like Labour government and Labour politicians pretty short-lived to anyone with like a memory of those times or has read anything about it. Like people weren't that keen on Blair after like, pretty quickly. They were keen on, I don't know, fucking like MI5 funded Britpop and stuff, right? But because there's no kind of cultural thing to like parasite off of, not even because even YouTubers are a bit too insubstantial for that. Starmer's left with just like, well, they have to believe in us personally. It's not enough to just have general vibes,
And even the people who, of the labor ministers who poll well, these are not the people. Then again, I'm not saying these are particularly good or worthwhile people who have particularly good or worthwhile aims. There's just like, for example, Angela Rayner being associated with the Employment Rights Act, even as she's watering it down.
Yeah, and like because Angela Rayner is authentically capable of getting the press of like being a bit of a legend, right? No one's. I get that. I get why like people might feel a bit warmly towards her. Nobody is like, I will die in the West Streeting Fedayeen.
Yeah. There's no like, do you want to get like West Streeting on Diary of a CEO? Is that your plan?
What I learned about forgiving myself by killing a bunch of trans kids.
Yeah. So the this person goes on and says, low trust in politics, low turnout, lack of a sense of delivery. Those aren't things we're going to change the Times headline. We need to be in people's faces constantly on YouTube and TikTok. Is there anything worse you could imagine than just having West Streeting?
Liz Kendall mandatory TikTok dance. It's gratifying to know that they're suffering in government almost as much as I want them to. Just Starmer's press team rolling up to your ministry and being like, do the TikTok dance. Not like that. Do it better.
Look, it's been 5 years. We have just taught Torsten Bell how to floss. It has taken so long. It's like there's been 3 to 7 viral dance phenomena, but we finally nailed this one. It's a little late.
Morgan McSweeney with 2 cigarettes on the go at the same time, massive bags under his eyes, trying to explain to Rachel Reeves the concept of Fortnite.
Yeah. I mean, that's like ultimately, right? He says, if we're going to leave a vacuum in these spaces, that's where we get toxic narratives emerging and going unchallenged, where people's real concerns get jumped on and twisted. Before they go on to say, we acknowledge that the only Labour MP who's like an influencer in their own right is Zara Sultana. We acknowledge that, but she's not who we want.
No, of course not.
We want to do what she does, which is make like TikTok videos and so on, but we want to be saying something else. Or even like, Gary Stevenson has become pretty ubiquitous on social media, going on Question Time and so on. And they keep looking at like thinking, okay, well, people clearly like these people. Voters like these people. They're speaking to their real concerns. I assume because they like the TikToks.
Yeah, it must be the style and not the substance, right? Yeah. Like people must enjoy. I don't know. Maybe if we all like, mimic the affect, then people will really get into it. And definitely not. People aren't like interested in them talking about stuff like inequality, right? They're interested in like the accent.
Well, and that's where like I already like am completely pilled on once you see the similarities, you can't unsee them. Because what I'm thinking about is like Gavin Newsom being like, I have a podcast and Steve Bannon's on it, right? Because if they're just thinking about affect, right? Of like, oh, they like the TikToks, they like the dances, they like the Fortnite, they like the podcasting. The next step in this kind of like bird-brained analytical idea is like, maybe they just like far-right content and hearing these guys. And then you have like, the guy who was kind of lined up to be the centrist Dem being like, no, let's hear Steve out. Let's hear what he has to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to see, Starmer go on a podcast with Tommy Robinson from jail.
Yeah. Starmer having to arrest himself for breaching a court order. Yeah, like it's like I think that when you see an obsessions with messaging like this are what happens when you are, I think, totally disconnected from power and have utterly removed any substance from your own relationship with power. And I think it's very amusing that both the Democrats, who are probably about to be fucking declared a terrorist organization by the Trump administration, and Labour Party, who has one of the largest majorities in recent years, are doing this in recent years, in decades, are doing the same kinds of thing where they are both so far from power despite their opposite relationships to one another as to where they are in government. Right. They are so far from. I mean, if you want to know what a powerless government in power looks like, again, not actually powerless. They could do things. They're just so constrained and so lobotomized that they are avoiding doing them. And so they have made themselves powerless.
They're doing all those TikToks. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Is Keir Starmer sounding not just like American Democrats, but also sounding increasingly like Rishi Sunak, talking about how, for example, small boat crossings make him personally angry at a summit against immigration crime recently.
It's also really funny. Like we haven't really talked about foreign policy in a minute, and I think it's really funny how Starmer's using that as a kind of like fire escape to be like, well, all of this is terrible and everyone hates me, but I do get to be a statesman, right? And I do get to try and like hammer together some kind of like best value NATO alternative, right? Which isn't to, make any judgment on that in itself, but just like, I can understand why you'd rather be looking at that side of your desk than the side of the desk that is like, we trying to teach Liz Kendall some like fun dances.
Yeah, we tried to have Liz Kendall do a Vogue style 100 questions interview about like, which people she thinks should be, killed through neglect.
Yeah, we've got her like on the tube. We've clipped a tiny microphone to her Oyster card and we're asking her a bunch of really banal questions. And we think that really that's going to swing it in a few years' time at the next election.
Yeah. So the ultimate failure of the center left is to get increasingly obsessed with just post better, just post more and better. And I'm sure
you have to build that cadre of posters and like brain rotted, very online people authentically, right? Like that's something that the left spent a long time doing. And, the center spent a lot of time complaining about like whether that's like, fuck Bernie bros or whether that's momentum or whatever. But like these kind of like these bullying left wingers who know how to post. It's like, no. Only the left put in the hard yards of investing and making everyone go on the computer and drive themselves insane. We did that work.
Well, and they had an opportunity to do that, right? In 2017, it was time for some game theory. Like you had, centrist libs actually going insane on the TL all the time. But like, they just let it slip through their fingers. Like they had generational talent and they didn't, put it to work.
It's brutal. And I mean, the thing is as well is that, the left it was a potential resource. All you had to do was give us everything we wanted. And I don't think that was too small an ask, given that it would have fixed everything. But I understand why they didn't.
Yeah. You know what? I wish the Labour Party best of luck trying to find the version of Gary Stevenson who tells you to personally work harder.
Yeah. Best of luck learning to post. Oh, it'll be a long search for a city trader who's willing to tell people to work harder, I imagine.
Yeah.
So should take them a while.
I wanna transition into our main segment here. And I got to start using a new word for segment changes.
Yeah, you really do. Yeah, the thing is, I've just like done like neuro-linguistic programming on you. So now it's just in your head, the phrase transition.
When I was resigning from the State Department, everyone kept telling me like, good luck with your transition. Like we're here, like that's actually the term for resignation. Like, well, just for the next step in your transition, like we're going to ship all your stuff. What's your home address? So I know that you're transitioning out. And I was just like, I was sitting there like, what? Element of this process that I didn't know about.
My favorite Trump tweet still is inexplicably transition to greatness with 3 exclamation marks. No other context.
Yeah. As part of our transition into the next segment here, I have a deed poll. I want to switch to our main segment here, and I'm going to start it with yet another chapter in the U.S. is becoming the U.K., but at greater speed, which means they will at some point overtake us in being the UK.
Oh, God. The food's about to get 1,000,000 times worse.
Yeah. What this is going to be all about is something that, Joseph, you and I have talked about a little bit, and I think is worth getting into a little bit more, is the ongoing immigration dragnets and sort of ideological campaigns being waged by various parts of the U.S. state. And what I've noticed is that before we sort of get into what these campaigns are, what the immigration dragnets are, and so on, is that they are doing to their higher education sector what it has taken the UK years to do to its higher education sector. And this is through a combination of not just sort of, spurious, free speech claims, silencing sort of more or less not just like silencing like anti-imperialist protesting and stuff, but silencing like even something that sort of smacks of vague progressivism, right? We've both countries have been outraged about like, vegan Mondays or whatever for a very long time. But the thing that sort of, I would say, doomed the UK higher education sector is that when it was completely marketized, all of those funding gaps that emerged when sort of state funding sort of dried up or diminished considerably came from the UK's hardline approach to immigration, deterring international students from coming to study, right? And I'm not also going to pretend the US system of higher education was in a great way before. Most of these places are glorified asset management firms that happen to credential a few 21-year-olds, right? Outside of research being a different thing entirely, of course. But its problems until now were please change course to avert doom loop rather than doom loop currently occurring. Enjoy your doom loop, right? This is just another point of convergence between these two states that are just going really well. So yeah, this is one of the main dragnets that you've discussed, Joseph, which is you call it the like Batar denunciation dragnet.
Yeah. So right now, I think the important thing to like keep in mind, and it's just like I want to be like very clear-eyed about what's happening in the U.S. is like it's several overlapping things going on differently. And each one of those is like a touch point for another type of state decay, right? And the one that has come kind of first to higher ed and is, I think, really indicative of like what's happened to the higher education system is the I think it's like 212A4, but it's basically the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, individually like picking people by name and being like, your green card or visa is revoked. We're deporting you for your activities in campus Palestine protests. And the thing about those, they're very famous. I mean, Mahmoud Khalil is one of those people. There's also a professor at Yale, Hele Doutaghi, who studies like third worldist international law, who's also kind of in the same situation. Those people are all personally named by people close to the Trump administration, like politically, like, I mean, Miriam Adelson specifically, or Batar, or Canary Mission, but also people who are like, and it could be like individuals who are also like close to and rub shoulders with the institutions of higher education themselves, right? And this is a space where it's not so much like the government coming in and abducting students, so much as the government going in and abducting students with the acquiescence and kind of complicity of the higher educational institutions themselves, for whom, the students are kind of a secondary thing to like, how is the endowment doing?
I saw Johns Hopkins sort of issuing guidance, more like a warning really to their staff not to hide any of their co-workers or students from the feds should they come knocking. Which
the statement wasn't even "don't hide them." It was, "if you know, don't warn them."
Yeah.
It's there is a total like lack of an element of protection or care for the kind of educational community characteristics of these institutions, because they're all real estate hedge funds at this point, right? And if the actual purges are coming in on that high a level, then that's kind of something the university has said it's okay with. Now, is that same attitude going to persevere if these dragnets become more indiscriminate? One of the other dragnets that's kind of like the 4.5 dragnets, I think, that exist. One of the other one is Muslim Ban 2.0, which is something that was supposed to go online on March 20th, and according to the executive order, and no one can figure out if it has or not, right? And that would be a much broader kind of mass rejection of prospective students when they haven't even entered the United States yet. You're going in and you've got your acceptance letter and you're applying for a student visa, and it says, no, you liked a Free Palestine Instagram post. That is going to mess with the money to a degree, because a lot of these foreign students, they all pay cash tuition, and it keeps a lot of schools solvent. But I also don't know if anyone really cares so much if a couple small liberal arts colleges in the Northeast go under because of this,
Yeah, I mean, I've quote from the sort of trade association for sort of the foreign students industry in the U.S. in general, said that universities must work to remind prospective students that detentions like these of a pro-Palestinian activist at Columbia University, and more recently a scholar at Georgetown, are still not the norm.
It's just don't worry, it's an exception. And is that exception codified into some kind of a state? Well, don't worry about it.
Yeah, don't worry about that either. It'll probably be fine. Come study in the U.S. A ringing endorsement.
It's fine. Come study in the U.S., the place that, binds but does not protect.
She goes on. We have international students at lots of universities, said the spokeswoman, and news coverage has focused on consequences for international students at just a couple of colleges. So we have to put into perspective the fact that the vast majority of students are from universities where we're not hearing anything. So
this is the thing. If you're like, don't worry, very, very few people get sort of like abducted off the street and held incommunicado and then shipped to Louisiana, having been told that the Secretary of State is like personally trying to kick them out of the country. And then it's going to be like many lawsuits and then we'll see what happens. Okay, yeah, the extent might not be bad yet, but the consequence is, like if you're doing sort of like mental calculus of should I study in the US, I think it's fair to conclude that like, okay, even if this almost certainly isn't going to happen to me, it would be bad enough if it did that I don't want to do it.
Yeah, it's like the logic of getting on a plane, right? If someone says this plane has a 99% chance of landing safely, you don't get on the plane. Like you don't do that. Nevertheless, yeah. I go on. There's two ways to look at it, right? If you wanted to look at it from the university perspective, which I don't really want to for more than a couple of minutes, is that there is this thing that the sector like sort of depends on does go away. There seems to be no plan to fill it, but most universities seem to have accepted that they are in crisis mode and they respond to crisis by betraying everybody in that particular community to try to appease the leadership.
Listen, when somebody attacks you, you just roll over and like show your belly and it's fine. Start betraying people voluntarily. They love that.
Yeah, exactly. So and there's this, as you say, there's this student dragnet, but it's also not just people even who are liked a Free Palestine Facebook post once, right? I mean, there is the story of Ali Reza Durodi, who was just never participated in a campus protest, just is Iranian, and then like got a charge for like reckless driving several years ago and is being targeted largely, it seems, on the basis of his nationality.
Yeah. And that's where these things overlap. And I think it's important to kind of disaggregate like what's going on between like, is my face on Canary Mission? Like, does Batar post about me threateningly? Will Marco Rubio personally send agents to arrest me? And it is personal. Like there are rumors, and I gut check, no evidence. No public evidence on this, but just vibes. I believe they're credible rumors that like actual State Department diplomatic security agents might have been involved in some of these things, which is like Marco Rubio's personal little Praetorian Guard, right? Like it's it's becoming that, but it's really just like a small law enforcement agency that like protects embassies and guards VIPs, That's one level. Then I'm pretty sure there's also like an ICE social media center that's just randomly going through people's Facebooks and sending them emails saying your visa's revoked, you need to get out of the country, which isn't really legally accurate. And there have been a couple hundred other people like, Marco Rubio was like, oh, we've revoked 300 visas, which is actually really not that many. There's a couple hundred more who are getting emails saying like, you don't have a visa anymore. And then there's, the dragnet going on by Customs and Border Protection when you actually enter the United States, which is like going through your phone. By the way, not the rest of your social media, just what's on your phone, and denying you entry based on that, even if you have a visa. And then there's the like, does the Muslim ban exist yet? It's not quite sure level. All of these get read and parsed at the same thing, right? But every level is a different actor in the bureaucracy trying to stake out turf for themselves, or trying to like being directed to extend whatever power is currently in their hands to fulfill this ideological objective, right? And right now, everyone else is just trying to get out of their way. So I'm glad you brought up Ali Reza's case, because it is, it's a minor traffic violation. It wouldn't be a deportable offense, but you see that in the computer and, nationality says Iran. And if you're one of those, low-ranking ICE guys being reassigned to look at people's Facebook photos, you're like, jackpot. I look great if I can say I deported an Iranian, right? And whether it's targeted malice or just opportunism, it's all overlapping, I think, in a way that's freaking a lot of people out about like what's going on. And I do think it's prudent. Like my studies in the United States have a 2% chance of me being black bagged and sent to like a sweltering detention camp in Louisiana. That 2% would be too high for me, you know?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I mean, I think one of the things I wanted to go into, I want to go into a couple of things off of this. One of them is why Louisiana, but we'll hold off on that for a second, which is that what you're describing, or at least how about what you're describing sounds like to me is a series of ideological entrepreneurs who have been placed across different agencies and are competing to exact as much exemplary cruelty as they can in such a way that will increase their profile.
Yeah, pretty much. Increase their profile, but also in another context, save their asses, right? Like, I don't imagine that diplomatic security is super eager to do this, right? But if you're the director, or if you're part of another organization like the Bureau of Consular Affairs, and you know that the Doge cuts are coming, right? It's not even necessarily a sense that there's like every head of every agency right now is a political appointee trying to make a power grab. It's also like, well, if I don't play ball, we could wind up like USAID, where we're just locked out of our office one day, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how do you get the heat off of you and onto someone else?
Yeah, it's hot potato for whoever Elon Musk or the president is mad at, right? And like right now, it's a couple of hundred students who are having their lives like deeply dislocated. It could be a lot more, and it could get worse than that, depending on the bargains that get struck, right? But it's also pretty clear that there's not really institutional roadblocks to any of this. Riley, like you mentioned, the Tren de Agua stuff. There was recently a Supreme Court case called Munoz versus United States that came down to a visa refusal based on gang tattoos, right? And the substance of the case was like, would you care to explain why you made that determination that these were gang tattoos? And the Supreme Court basically said, we don't have to tell you how we made that decision, right? So there's precedent for that. There's precedent for targeted deportations by the Secretary of State. There's precedent kind of for everything that's happened up until now. So while it's tempting to say like, this is unprecedented, and my whole thing that I'm constantly on about, this is all in the space of continuity with existing bureaucratic developments in the United States, right? It's just this kind of theatrical cruelty starts happening when just a couple outside confluences of events push what already exists into spaces that look new, but have really just been kind of unexercised powers, right? And I feel like a lot of the discussions about the UK that, I hear on Trash Future are really discussions about like momentum, right? Mm-hmm. Well, not the part of the Labor Party momentum. Yeah. But you know what I mean? But actual oh shit, this thing has been slowly falling apart for a long time. And what do we do with it now? Or you also have institutions, like the Met, which I know has not covered itself in glory, who have just kind of stumbled into very broad and expansive authorities over the past couple of decades. And when that starts hitting this vortex, really gross things start to happen.
I mean, if you want to talk about the Met, sort of, by the way, absolutely you could say stumbling on the one hand or grabbing on the other. I mean, it's tough to say because they're such a strange organization. But they recently 30 Metropolitan Police officers stormed a Quaker meeting house to arrest 6 people who had not committed a crime, who were just accused of planning a Palestine solidarity protest in London.
Yeah, first time since the early days of nonconformism that the police have been kicking in doors of Quaker meeting houses.
Yeah. It's nobody's getting transported to Australia, I guess.
Well, yet.
But yeah, indeed. When I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about the broad powers that the American enforcement arms have reserved for themselves, you think about, okay, well, these are the powers that have already been reserved to British ones, by a kind of momentum in that direction, by ideological demands that are repeated by everybody across the spectrum of people in politics who are listened to regularly, right? You must do something about the small boats. You must do something about the sort of, blue-haired Hamas supporters or whatever. You must do something. Something must be done. We must reserve more powers to the police. We must be more, we have more crackdowns. We're going to plant fucking ninja swords and Zanbatos on them. Who cares, right? But I was just thinking that is the same pattern, right? And what if one of those people who was rounded up for, again, the crime of having planned to do something, not having committed any crimes, what if one of those kinds of public hysterias, they get married up with the anti-immigration bugbear in the same way that is outdone in the United States? You can see the same kind of regime emerging here with the same kind of logic, just with different institutions being carried via momentum towards those kinds of powers, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it is this kind of crux of basically inherited Cold War or War on Terror era powers running up against, and I think austerity plays a pretty large part of this. I mean, that's looming over all of this in the United States and has been a part of Britain in a much harsher way for a much longer time, right? But it's this interesting thing where, there's a destruction or hollowing out of the state And the canard is, oh, these people hate the administrative state. They want to take away state capacity. And the kind of defense is like, we need our state back, right? We need to have these abilities and capacities again. And that's like, you see a lot of objections coalescing around that, at least in the circles I run in the US, about like, oh my God, what they did to USAID, what they did to the US Institute of Peace. I can't believe it. Like, we need these things back. And that kind of belies the question of like, do they really hate the administrative state? Because one of the things about these multiple overlapping dragnets, and also the sudden completely unhinged shift on US documentation standards for trans people, is like, it's all quite bureaucratically elaborate. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So cables and things have been leaking a lot. But one of the things I saw, I think it might have been Ken Klippenstein that shared it. It was definitely not something that I obtained by any other means. I read it on a website. Get off my back. I think like all the stuff that big journalists have been leaking is it was one of the things about like how we are going to monitor student activities for arrests during protests. And it specifically directed visa officers to look at this little box that like in the back of the 1994 beige computer program, which I remember it took me a year and a half of working in a visa section to figure out what that box did. Like there was literally a point where like the three of us were standing around being like, what the hell does this box do? And they're like, you guys need to check the box every single day to see if someone's been arrested for Palestine protest, right? Or like the directive to like systematically misgender trans people on their passports and non-US citizen trans people on their visas. Like you have to go back in and edit stuff, right? You have to go back in and look it up. And it's this weird thing where the momentum heads towards cruelty, but then the entropy gets accelerated because you have people who are about to have a lot less resources being asked to do like a lot more. Like I always sort of the whole small boats mania in the UK is kind of interesting to me because that always goes hands in hand with like stories about how the Royal Navy, it basically like can't generate surface task forces anymore.
Yeah.
And when they're like, oh, well, we need to send out the gunboats to shoot them up. I'm like, dog, what gunboats? Right? Like, so like it's a really interesting, and I don't think it's a race to the bottom. I think there's going to be state capacity for cruelty, right? But I think what the state is and how it operates and the sort of idea of like, a high 20th century administrative state or even a reimagined smart 21st century, I don't know, cyber state with Tony Blair ID cards. Like, I don't think either of those models are really adequate for what's coming and what we're kind of in the embryonic stages of. Like, there's going to be something new and shittier in every respect that's going to emerge out of this in the next couple of years.
I mean, that strikes me as well because, like, there's a huge base of people who what they want is, whether this is in the UK or in the US, what they want is some kind of, like, revolutionary action. And for them, that was the point of electing Trump. It will be the point of electing Farage of, they come on TV one day and say like everybody you don't like is going to get like arrested and sent to El Salvador or shot, right? And using these kind of like very elaborate like bits of like state capacity is always going to feel unsatisfying to those people. And yeah, I worry about that being the thing that then generates the next thing, is that like even Trump can't sort of like get rid of all these people like we want him to.
Because I made a joke about I want to put Stephen Miller one day in front of like a special tribunal or a Revolutionary People's Court, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a common emotion on the right. But there's something about like, even if it is exceptional and terrifying, even if seeing, Rumesa Öztürk like black bagged on the street by plainclothes police like wasn't generally horrifying, it's not satisfying to them that, haha, did you know that we've reassigned diplomatic security agents from investigating passport fraud to abducting Muslims?
It's interesting, even if you look at the kind of responses to that, it's gleeful on the right, but it's still gleeful in the tone of like, oh, wait until you see what happens when we really take the gloves off.
Yeah, because we all know what they feel about trans people. We all know what they feel about Muslims, right? We all know what they feel about the other. And this doesn't provide that, right? Even Muslim banning people, even if Stephen Miller gets his wish and he gets to designate people as terrorists, and you go, oh, you're a 3B designated terrorist, you'll never set foot in the United States, even if your child is a U.S. citizen. Like, let's be clear, when they say designated terrorist, they're seeing the FLIR drone kill cam.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
There's not a satisfaction of bloodlust that can come out of these extant processes, and that's what really scares me.
Yeah, because the only thing that's gotten close, the only thing that's got these people most of the way there is the SECOT stuff, is El Salvador, right? And the question then for them is, how do we do more of that?
Yeah. Yeah, this is the come as you are phase, right? Of all of this. And I think even in the UK, it's the come as you are phase. I mean, like, well, I'm stepping outside of my my comfort zone here, but Brexit did seem cathartic to some people, but none of the things that they wanted. I don't know. Are your passports a different color now?
They literally are, but that hasn't been enough, right? It's kind of it's unsatisfying fundamentally still, because true Brexit has not been achieved. True Brexit is when you never have to see a foreigner ever.
Yeah. Just so you know, by the way, that's what Reform is currently campaigning on.
Yes, yeah, I know.
Like, that's literally what they are currently campaigning on.
Yeah. And it's something about this where it's like, you're gonna have to deal with the fact that there is a bottomless lust for death and violence on this, because, it's not lost on me that, like, while these deportations for protesting Gaza are happening, like, the bombing is restarting in Gaza, and they've greenlit announced plans to ethnically cleanse everyone and kill everyone, right? And even that isn't the visceral feeling of satisfaction that these people want, right? Like you look at the organizations that have openly boasted about preparing the deportation lists, and they're still kind of whiny and unhappy and unsatisfied about it. And that's not great, right? So, like, here's hoping that entropy can, the entropy of state failure can just, like, outpace the capacity to do yet more violence. But I do think that there's got to be the satisfying answer, which I think for this kind of populist moment, whether that's Reform in the UK or Trump a year from now in the US, like, I think what I really think is it's got to be something they come up with themselves, right? Because playing with someone else's toys doesn't feel nice.
So you mean to say that the reusing these powers and institutions that had been created in previous administrations ultimately is still too limiting for them?
It's still, I think it is still too limiting, not because there's a lack of power. You don't need to change a word of everything. You have actually incredibly vast power, and a lot of those powers haven't even been exercised yet. Like, we're not even talking about new powers being used. Like, the Secretary of State, if they name an individual and say deport them because I say so, like, that's been on the books since, like, the 50s, right? And that's also, I mean, not to be a little, like, glasses, like, actually it's a clip, it's a magazine, not a clip, but, like, pretty much every sovereign state has something like that, right? Like, every sovereign state, nation state has the capacity to look at a certain individual and be like, get out of here.
Well, famously, the UK did that with Shamima Begum some years ago, even stripping her of her British citizenship. So we don't just reserve the right to. This is why I say, right, these are countries that are much more similar, especially recently, and people are giving them credit for. Our Home Secretary explicitly reserves the power to strip dual nationals of British citizenship if it is deemed sort of necessary for national security, which also is why then I go back to this meeting at the Quaker Meeting House. If any of them were dual nationals, at what point do these sort of constant demands that are not ever viscerally satisfied, as you say, Joseph, at what point does a probably Labor frontbencher say, you know what, one of them's a dual citizen, we could send her, we could actually, like, deport her or whatever.
Yeah, and I think it goes back, like, to the episode you had with Shocks, where it's like, if we're moving into an idea of, like, the state as, like, a collection of fiefdoms driven by people who are trying to kind of cash out on their own terms for themselves. If we do have Siloviki in both Atlantic powers, it's unclear if they're actually going to be able to create something new for themselves, right? And it's unclear. Like, I'm in a space of tension of being very apprehensive of the future, but also not knowing if there's, given the motives and the sort of, like, the kind of wheel of history behind this moment, I don't know if there's going to be the capacity to create new stuff, right? There were a lot of things that the previous Trump administration didn't do because they just didn't realize they, like, could do them. They've done all of that stuff this time around, but it's unclear if they're going to be able to build things. And, like, one of the things that, like, my apprehension about, like, is the Muslim ban in effect or not, one of the theories that I have about it is, like, maybe they just couldn't get their shit together to agree on an SOP by now. Like, it's entirely possible that they just, like, haven't been able to organize how the domestic review process is even going to work, right? And I think the UK is clearly in that space for infrastructure. I think the US is heading into that space for, like, air travel, right? But, like, where's the tension between intention and capacity right now? It is completely lost to me. Like, Trump came in and one of his big things was, like, we're going to have mass deportations. We're going to mobilize the army. They sent the 82nd Airborne down to the Mexican border to do kind of nothing, right? And you can see a lot of those things being rolled back. Like they are not housing deportees at Gitmo anymore because it just didn't make sense. They're not doing deportations with military planes anymore because those are way more expensive than the civilian ones. They were asking for volunteers from like USCIS, like our equivalent of the Home Office immigration people, to like sign up as like auxiliaries for mass immigration raids that kind of haven't materialized.
Jesus.
Yeah. So like it's a level where they were basically like, we're going to do the Volksturm, but for ICE. And we're going to have a bunch of people who are just like checking boxes on like H-1B applications, like as for legal services or as part of like mass mobilization raids. And it looks like either no one volunteered or they just decided to furlough those people because it was a bigger win for them to slow down the immigration process. So like
incredible. We forced all of our Volksturm to get fired.
Yeah. Basically, it's like it's showing. It's like one guy shows up and the Volksturm's there, and you're about to pass out the Panzerfaust 12-year-olds, and another guy shows up and it's more based to fire all of you, right? And I don't want to sound like an optimist or like it'll all blow over or it'll all settle in the end. It's already not blown over for hundreds of people. Right. Like, and I don't want to be that American who like comes in to like trash talk the UK because I was there recently. It's great. But there is this idea, this kind of feeling of like, your episodes about the water or the school buildings falling down. And there's definitely similar things going on, I think, with like deeper infrastructure in the United States. But all that stuff in the UK feels very close to the surface. So like, I'm watching you guys, let's see how this goes.
It's a reversal of the usual thing when the US is like kind of 5 years politically ahead of the UK. We're kind of the preview, which is unnerving.
Yeah, we are the coming attractions. I mean, there are a couple more things I wanted to talk about, though, right? Which is you've raised this point of a gap between the state capacity to inflict cruelty, not because, again, the rules and powers aren't there, but because the actual organization frequently is not up to the task. What I think this gap gets filled is with increasing stakes-raising mass hysterias that are going to get more and worse, and that are going to be, again, you say, like, we ask, like, well, what are the centrist parties going to do? Is they are going to, again, keep trying to triangulate with mass hysterias, right? Like, how many people all agreed with one another that one of the people targeted at Columbia University had like foreknowledge of October 7th, right? A lot of people just agreed, yeah, that seems fine. We're just going to assume that there are people at campus Palestine solidarity groups that had foreknowledge of October 7th. And we're just going to take that as a baseline and then react as though that's true. And I think the more there is a gap between the demands, the constant escalating demands that are made for performative cruelty to migrants, progressives, LGBT people, whoever, the more there's a gap between those demands and the state's ability to fulfill them for the reasons that we've talked about, the more like sort of mass hysteria and possibly even like personal action are going to step in, right? You always remember the Gestapo, not a big organization, but there were a lot of people who like to inform,
And not just inform, I mean, act. Like, the UK example, like, you talk about like the volunteer border guards. Wasn't that actually floated in the UK for a while?
I don't think they ended up doing it. But yeah, the volunteer border guards is another perfect example of not actually having the state that you want to mete out the cruelty that you desire.
So like Marco Rubio announced that what they were going to use to scan foreign nationals for Hamas links was AI, right? And
Incredible.
My first thought was like, oh God. And my second thought was like, no way State Department IT is going to be able to integrate that into the computers, right? Like absolutely not. Like I was carrying around a BlackBerry in 2017. Like that's not going to happen. But Haile Dutagi, who was fired from their position, I think they're attempting to deport her from Yale, was denounced as a Hamas-linked pro-terrorist anti-Semite scholar by an AI-written article on a Zionist website.
Jesus.
So a private use. So like if you think about this as privatization, right? Like, the Canary Mission, Batar, whoever, they'll just set up, they'll be like, Chat GPT, create me a list of the top 10 anti-Semites at Yale, at Columbia. And that algorithmic, they basically wrote an article, they said it was hers, and on that basis, she's fighting not just for like her job, but her right to like live in the country that she lives in, right? Mm-hmm. And, outsourcing, is there the capacity? The capacity might come from outside the state, right? I saw Goody Proctor with Hamas, and I think you pulling up the prospect of mass hysterias is like, and even the first subject of the fake truck guy who got pardoned, who has a degree of personal access to the president because he gave him some money, right? And if this is pay to play, the thing that I'm most worried about, now, whatever I'm hysteric about, the fact that we think Students for Justice in Palestine at Columbia knew about October 7th when Hezbollah and Iran didn't, right?
Just listen, sometimes you can forget to add people to group chats. It happens. Kind of the reverse of the signal thing.
You're in the paraglider, you've crossed over the wall, and you're like, wait, there's one, I gotta text one guy, right? And that could be an end state, right? Is that basically whoever's got the buy-in access, and at this point, we're talking about Miriam Adelson personally, right? For example, in the United States, definitely has had a hand in this. Or, someone who's given a couple $1 million to Trump and is a good guy can be like, I'm down for whatever the next, mass hysteria, whatever the next panic is. You definitely see that with RFK, right? With RFK Jr. is like, dude, there could be some real grim stuff that happens there in terms of mass hysteria.
Because I almost think of it in the same way as like when we spoke with Julian Field a few weeks ago from QAA, the question was, if you think about the original QAnon conspiracy theory as the thing that emerged to fill in the gaps between the right-wing revolutionary utopian demands that were being made of the Trump administration and its capacity and, in some cases, will to deliver them, right? QAnon emerged to fill that gap. And I think that if you want to zoom in specifically to Trump 2025, the demands for, exemplary cruelty, there's going to inevitably be that gap. And it is, as you say, it's not just going to be beliefs, like mass hysterical beliefs or that are going to move in to fill that gap. It's also going to be, as you say, just entrepreneurial and enterprising individuals, essentially, who are going to be like, the state's not doing that. I can do that.
I'll do it. And that's always been, vigilante and anti-immigrant violence, in the US and the UK both have long histories, right? I mean, if you saw the events, was it last summer in the UK, these horrifying race riots even race riots doesn't even do it. They were just one-sided pogroms, right? Led by individuals. There hasn't been something the US, we still do things a little differently. We drive on the other side of the road. We have mass shootings. You have, a bunch of,
different cultural expressions.
Different cultural expressions of a similar sentiment. But I'm really worried that this could go to a really dark place of that same thing of individuals taking action, but not just as a racist lunatic enacting individual violence of if you were to look at the person who, maybe in the 2010s or 2020s would have wound up as a mass shooter. Is there a future where they have a channel to being a kind of shabiha for ICE? Right. Yeah. And that's the channeling of mass reactionary energy through the state because the state can't do it anymore. It's just, hey, another TF callback. It's like when the Byzantines are just hiring more and more mercenaries, or any imperial decline, you call in auxiliaries, right? And there's been no motion towards that. And I almost don't want to speak this into existence, that this could be a possibility, but it's already happening just in a more genteel, moneyed elite level, right? It's organizations that are out even outside the mainstream. I think Shai Davidai fell out with Batar because they were too nuts. But they've still clearly got lists and they're turning them over and people are listening to them,
Yeah. And I guess you ask just what is the other side sort of putatively? What are they going to do? The people who are officially empowered as the opposition is very clearly I predict that they will come up with this thing we talked about just now of identifying the gap between the desire to perform cruelty and the lack of certain elements of state capacity to do it at the scale you want. I predict that the official Democratic response is going to be to point at that lack of state capacity and say, see, they can't even perform the cruelty. You should trust us to do it.
100%. 100%. Sir, that mob should be made up of ICE agents, right?
They're not doing this black bagging by the book, and the book has changed significantly since the Constitution. But
exactly. And you can already see that in the idea of a defense of our institutions, right? That idea or that notion or bring back the state or bring back, whatever. It's under what terms and conditions, right? And I think that there is going to be now's the time to be very very discerning and very careful, not about just what is happening, because it's the worst I've ever seen in my lifetime, but it's not apocalyptic. And it doesn't mean that we should freeze and freak out. We should ascertain exactly what's happening and understand the mechanisms by which this is happening. I think we've talked, at length, but I'll say it explicitly. There's a lot of weakness in this structure right now, right? But we also need to be very aware of where's the gravity of pushing back against this, right? And there's an immediate, whether you're kicking down the door to the Quaker meeting house, I don't know how that plays over on your side of the pond. I don't know if you're all going to be wearing frilly collars and there's going to be I don't know where that's going over there. But, in the US, I think there are red lines crossed for a lot of people. There's an immediate reaction to that, which is the right thing that we should be doing, which is immediate popular pushback. If you are a student at Johns Hopkins, fuck the administration, warn people at the very least. Do more if you can, if you are a citizen. They're not denaturalizing people yet, right? But also to be very conscious of where the opposition to this is coming about. And I really noticed how, Pete Buttigieg said a swear about, I can't believe they leaked that information in the group chat. And it's if the content of, who even cares about protocol? You could even say that was a group chat about not doing war crimes. If we hypothetically just pretended that wasn't a group chat about blowing up an apartment building of civilians to purportedly kill one guy, you could just focus on the fact that this is a crew of nakedly corrupt, stupid alcoholics, right? But they weren't even following that. They were I can't believe they discussed national security information in that Signal group chat. And there seems to be actual political traction behind that. That's a worse sign than any developments. That's a worse sign to me than developments happening in immigration enforcement right now. If I'm going to be looking at the long term,
just kind of liberals, they love to just concede the important bit and focus on process. So great, fantastic. I look forward to a very well organized concentration camp.
I feel bad, especially after the Shocks episode, that we're going out on a downer like this.
Well, it's not our fault. It's the world, right?
Look, we're playing the hand we're dealt, and unfortunately, the hand we've been dealt is aces and eights. So I don't know what to tell you.
I don't play Balatro. I don't know any of that.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah, that's Wild Bill Hickok was just playing Balatro on his phone when he was killed.
They killed him for it, and they were right to do so.
Not a lot of people know Wild Bill Hickok invented Balatro at the Deadwood mining camp in South Dakota.
Yeah, the original names for the Jokers were all unprintable.
Yeah. It was Jack McCall resented that the Jokers were called McCalls. Anyway, look, you ask why we tend to go out on downers recently. As we said, that's the hand we've been dealt. But look, Joseph, it is, again, one of these things where we have to almost walk this tightrope of, while it is pleasant to talk to you, I do wish always it were under sort of polar opposite circumstances.
Oh yeah. Oh, you and me both. It's a lot of I hate going around saying when I'm going around saying I called it a lot, but my voice just gets smaller and more haunted every time.
Yeah, that's right. So look, thank you very much for coming on the show. Joseph, thank you very much again for talking to us today. No plugs, which is I like to have a no plugs episode occasionally.
Yeah. No plugs. Just learn your rights about de-arresting people.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
And then we will see you on the bonus episode in a few days. I think we may be talking Tesla. We may be talking Meta, but we're going to be doing one of those two things in a couple short days. So we will see you there. Bye, everybody.
Bye.